From sea to shining sea, we stand so tall. Voices raised for freedom where we all call. Pledges made with open hearts under the starry sky. Learning from the past, we find our way today. 9 o'clock rings, proud and aligned we stand. TFs whisper softly, bravery we understand. Rising together through trials and strife, our unity strong like a bond of life. We gather at 9, hand in hand we hold. For freedom's sake, our voices bold and bold. Through history's lessons, we find our strength. Together we rise, with hope and our length. From every corner, we come with a purpose, united in spirit and freedom's great trust. No matter the challenge, we face it as one, with open hearts and minds. Our future is one. TFs echo softly, a symbol of might. Bravery in our hearts, in unity we fight. We gather at 9, hand in hand we'll hold. For freedom's sake, our voices bold and bold. Through history's lessons, we find our strength. Together we rise, with hope as our length.
In the early autumn of 1809, Meriwether Lewis, famed explorer, soldier, and governor of the Upper Louisiana Territory, set out from St. Louis on a journey that would end not in the early autumn of 1809, Meriwether Lewis, famed explorer, soldier, and governor of the Upper Louisiana Territory, set out from St. Louis on a journey that would end not in triumph, but in tragedy. His destination was Washington City, where he hoped to clear his name among mounting financial and political pressures. But somewhere along the rugged Natchez Trace, at a remote frontier inn called Grinder's Stand, Lewis met a violent and mysterious end. Lewis was just 35 years old. Only 3 years earlier, he had returned from the legendary Lewis and Clark expedition, having led the Corps of Discovery across the continent to the Pacific and back. President Thomas Jefferson, his mentor and patron, had appointed him governor of the Upper Louisiana Territory in 1807, a vast and unruly region that included present-day Missouri. But Lewis struggled in his new role. He clashed bitterly with his territorial secretary, Frederick Bates, whose letters to Washington cast Lewis as incompetent and possibly corrupt. The War Department refused to honor several of Lewis's expense vouchers, including costs related to returning the Mandan chief to his homeland, a diplomatic mission Jefferson had personally endorsed. Lewis had paid many of these expenses out of his pocket, and now creditors were closing in. In a letter to his friend and expedition partner William Clark, Lewis confided, quote, "I have not spent such a day as yesterday for many years. Several of my bills have been protested, and my creditors, all flocking in near the time of my setting out, distressed me much." End quote. Clark, alarmed by Lewis's mental state, later wrote to his brother, quote, "I do not believe there was ever an honester man in Louisiana, nor one who had purer motives than Governor Lewis. If his mind had been at ease, I should have parted cheerfully." End quote. On September 4th, 1809, Lewis departed St. Louis by boat, traveling down the Mississippi River to Fort Pickering, near present-day Memphis, Tennessee. There he was joined by Major James Neely, a U.S. Indian agent to the Chickasaw Nation, along with Lewis's personal servant, John Pernia, a free black man, and Neely's enslaved servant. Lewis had originally planned to sail to New Orleans and then up the Atlantic coast to Washington, but rumors of war with Britain and fears that his expedition journals might fall into enemy hands prompted him to change course. He would travel overland via the Natchez Trace, a 450-mile wilderness road stretching from Natchez, Mississippi to Nashville, Tennessee. The trace was notorious for its dangers, bandits, wild animals, and treacherous terrain. But Lewis pressed on, carrying with him his journals, financial records, and a letter to Jefferson. He also carried multiple firearms, including pistols, a rifle, and a tomahawk. On the evening of October 10th, Lewis arrived at Grinder's Stand, a frontier inn operated by Robert and Priscilla Griner. The inn sat near Little Swan Creek, about 72 miles southwest of Nashville. Neely had stayed behind to search for runaway horses, leaving Lewis with only the two servants. Mrs. Griner later gave conflicting accounts of what happened that night. In one version, she said Lewis was agitated, pacing and talking to himself like a lawyer. She claimed to hear gunshots around midnight, followed by Lewis crying out, "Oh Lord." In another version, she waited 2 hours before investigating, fearing for her own safety. When she finally entered Lewis's room, she found him bleeding from 2 gunshot wounds, one to the head and one to the abdomen. He was still alive, she said, and, quote, busily engaged in cutting himself from head to foot, end quote, with a razor. Lewis died shortly before sunrise on October 11th. Major Neely arrived later that day and arranged for Lewis to be buried near the inn. No formal inquest was held. Despite Lewis's national stature, his death was treated with startling indifference. President Jefferson, upon hearing the news, wrote, quote, "Of course, undaunted, honest, disinterested, liberal, he had a luminous mind." End quote. But Jefferson also acknowledged Lewis's, quote, sensible depressions of mind, end quote, suggesting suicide was plausible. William Clark, however, was less certain. In a letter to Lewis's mother, he wrote, quote, "I fear the weight of his mind has overcome him." End quote. Yet Clark later expressed doubts, saying, quote, "I fear the melancholy end of my friend was not of his own doing." End quote. Murder or suicide? The debate over Lewis's death began almost immediately and continues to this day. The arguments for suicide are: Lewis had reportedly attempted suicide weeks earlier while staying at Fort Pickering. He was suffering from depression, possibly exacerbated by alcoholism, malaria, or other illnesses. He had written a will and made arrangements for his papers to be sent to Jefferson, if anything should happen. The arguments for murder are: 2 gunshot wounds, one to the head, one to the abdomen, are unusual for suicide. No powder burns were reported, suggesting he may have been shot from a distance. His journals and financial records were never recovered. The Griners, previously impoverished, later moved to western Tennessee with enough money to buy land and enslaved laborers. In 1848, a Tennessee commission opened Lewis's grave and concluded he had been murdered, though they offered no forensic evidence. In recent decades, Lewis's descendants have petitioned the National Park Service to exhume the body for modern analysis, but the requests have been denied. Lewis was buried near Grinder's Stand, and in 1848 the Tennessee legislature erected a monument, a broken column, symbolizing a life cut short. The site is now part of the Natchez Trace Parkway, managed by the National Park Service. Visitors can walk the, quote, "footsteps through history trail," end quote, view exhibits at the Meriwether Lewis Visitor Center, and stand beside the grave of a man whose life embodied both the promise and peril of the early American Republic. His journals, though incomplete, remain among the most vivid records of the American frontier. His death, still shrouded in mystery, reminds us that even heroes are vulnerable, and that history often leaves its deepest questions unanswered.
Under the starry sky we gather, honoring heroes past and present. Their bravery, our light to follow. United we stand forever. Raising the flag, in honor they rise. Stars shining bright in memory of the wise. We come together under one sky. United we rise for freedom's high. Memories of valor in our hearts they stay, fighting for what's right day by day. Through storms and sunshine we hold strong. With every step our spirits long. Raising the flag, in honor they rise. Stars shining bright in memory of the wise. We come together under one sky. United we rise for freedom's high. Raising the flag, in honor they rise. Stars shining bright in memory of the wise. We come together under one sky. United we rise for freedom.